Hello and welcome back. This is video number 8 in the Flow Certified Coach training series. Today we're going to be talking about anticipatory vision. This is tile 6 of the 18 tiles that we have in the Flow formula at the moment. And today we have with us Glenn Ligori, and I'm going to let Glenn introduce himself.
Thanks, Andrew. Glenn Ligori. I am a Flow Certified Trainer internal, thus the I, and that's because I work for a company called ZF, or Americanized ZF, automotive supplier, global automotive supplier. And in my organization, I get to train the Flow framework along with my team. My team is called Methods Incubation, part of IT Innovation. We get to bring about change in the way people work through the flow model and through all the other models that we teach in here, as well as work throughout the organization to just get people to work a little bit differently. I've been with the company for just over 7 years, and I always like to tell people that Ted was one of my mentors, and when he worked with us for the last couple of years, and dearly miss him.
Yep, thanks. And the leadership takeaways for today is that this is the only tile that's bifurcated. I've waited almost 30 years to use this in a business situation, but that just means that it's divided in two. And Glenn's going to go into that on the next slide, and he's going to chat with you about the Stacy diagram and anticipatory vision. And then we're going to go through a couple of slides on vision about why it's so important for the leadership, not just to talk the talk, but actually walk the talk. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'll let Glenn dive right in.
So one of the things that for myself and my group of methods coaches, we bring in, number one, the first part of this, the Stacy diagram, the Stacy view of where do we think that our work is. Do we have, if we focus in the upper left in the individual quadrant, when we're talking about the axes of the Stacy diagram, we're talking about on the left, on the top to bottom to top, known technology to unknown technology. This is, what's the space that I'm working in? How well do I know the technology I'm working with? And interestingly, I work in an IT innovation group. So typically technology is a bit unknown. Maybe there's some new things coming about, but hopefully we know enough to be able to manage. And then the environment that I'm working in, how stable is that? Or even the requirements or the information flow or communication flow. There's a lot to this stability aspect of it. Because when we look at where am I placing myself in relationship to this matrix, how simple is my solution, or complicated versus complex? Then chaos or anarchy. That's a word that in my organization is, whoa, don't bring about the word chaos, right? Because in a German automotive supplier, we don't want chaos. We're dealing with products that could go into a car and it's the safety of people's lives, right? One thing I try to bring into talking about this matrix, or the diagram, I always use matrix, sorry, but in this diagram, complicated versus complex. Right? We know what simplicity is, and we know that we don't want to be out in that world of chaos. But we're typically going to work in this world of complicated and complex. Complicated to me is playing checkers. If you play the game of checkers, there are only so many moves that you can make, and each time you make a move, there are still only so many moves that can be made. It's mathematical. Sorry, I don't know the math, but it's only so many each time.
Yeah.
Whereas if I play chess or the game of Go, every move that you make exponentially increases the other number of moves. That's complex. Things are going to change. Now, there are grandmasters out there, of course, chess grandmasters that can play all those different moves, and they know all those different moves. But there's still, it exponentially grows. After the third, I believe it is after the third or fourth move in chess, no matter what is moved, each time it moves, it expands like by 128 times. It just keeps growing. So the point being, complexity is that instability and unknown layers where typically a lot of us work in innovation. Now, at an individual level, in that upper left quadrant, I have to think about that. I also have to think about how do I then go into my team environment and add in things like requirements, communication, the layering of communication. I know that somewhere else that it talks about as soon as you bring in multiple people into the communications, you always push out into that chaos layers, way out in the high levels of complexity and chaos. If I've got 3 people, how many different communication chains do I have?
6.
I have 50 people, right?
Well, there's
So,
actually a formula for that. It's n times n minus 1 divided by 2.
yes.
And I can't do the 51 in my head,
Yeah,
but
I know. I always throw that out there because I always have to have that on my, when
yeah,
I
but
teach
it's a
these, I
lot.
have this on the board, right? If I have this on the board and you write it out and you show them and you see that complexity getting out into that sort of chaos level, at a team level, at a team focus for the Stacy diagram is we
Hmm.
must ensure that it's not only technology and requirements, but we have to consider the communication layers. Yeah.
Well,
Then as we,
yeah,
yeah,
that's a really good point because you could, if you could visualize it in dots, you could have simple technology, you could have simple requirements or environment or a stable environment, but the complexity dot, it might be up in the complex area. And that, I think, is what really throws a lot of teams and projects into a little bit of chaos and confusion because they haven't taken into consideration that complexity. And when that happens, now all of a sudden they need to be using agile thinking and agile methodologies and
mindset.
things like that, and the mindset of agile in order to be able to even deal with just a very simple waterfall traditional project. And so this is a really good example that you're giving.
And to that point, to further that point just a little before I move to the next, is that when people look at the diagram, I think they want to just place one dot.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's missing in most communications about this diagram is that and unfortunately in our organization we have a diagram that looks like this. They don't call it Stacy, they want to call it something else, and then they overlay 2 circles on it and they say, well, everything is here, that's like our backbone, and then everything else that's agile or innovation is out in the upper right section of the diagram. And that's not accurate
Yeah.
because everything we do has multiple touch points, 3 if we really want to think about it.
Yeah.
Those requirements, the technology, or whatever those other 2 things we might want to balance along with the communication.
Yeah.
So that being said, as we shift the bifurcation to the right side of our boxes, when we talk about anticipatory vision, and I'll pull a Ted on this one for a moment. Ted was famous for when he did his classes, he would bring he had a bag that was stacks of books,
I think it was a
much like
full
what you see
suitcase.
behind me, much like this, right? People, when they know me, they're like, oh my God, did you read all that? Yeah, I do.
Yes, he does.
Um, and I've got stacks below and all, and so he would say, in regarding anticipatory vision, it comes from Dr. Daniel Burris's book called The Anticipatory Organization. He would literally go over, pull out his book, show it to people, and they'd be like, "Oh!" And you would see all his little sticky little tabs, sort of like what I don't know if it comes across in the video, little tabs and whatnot, and you knew he read that. Well, similar for me. This one really changed the way I was looking at some of these things probably about 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because the Stacy matrix or Stacy diagram by itself is a good view of how am I and my work in there, in the situation that we're in. Whereas when we look at it through the lens of the organizational and the product aspect, we have to think about this cascading the VSPT. Where are we looking at this from a product perspective and an organizational? Because if I say organizational chaos, all bets are off that this is going to be a model people are going to want to look at, right? So if I look at it from that product perspective, bottom right, because that flow, if I understand my vision, if I truly, truly understand my vision and I'm able to continue to deliver on that vision through my strategy, the bottom, right? High ability to execute the strategy.
Yeah.
If I can do both of those really, really well, my product itself is able to be anticipatory to the market, to the customer's needs. So, I think of your example, Andrew. I was telling this to my wife just yesterday of your involvement with Nokia
Mm-hmm.
back in the day.
Yeah.
And Nokia looking at their product lines as being the best. They had the best communication devices. They knew they owned the market, etc. Right? But they weren't thinking about what else was out there in the market. They didn't have a clear understanding of where they needed to go next. So their vision was kind of low.
Yeah.
Huh? And their ability to execute on a strategy was just keep doing what we do. Just keep doing what we're doing and do it well, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's low strategy. So they were very reactive, kind of not even proactive at that point, right? And you told them, this iPhone is coming out. This thing is coming out. You need to be aware of this. And they're like, who cares? We're the biggest. We're the best.
Yeah.
Literally. Now, literally, look where they are. Look where iPhone and Apple went, right? Valuations are billions and billions apart. So from a product perspective, that one for me really stands out because if you know that you have a better strategy and you have a clear vision, you're going to start to see things in the market related to your product. Take that another layer above to the organizational. Again, the clarity of the vision at the organizational level. I look at, for example, our vision statement of next generation mobility for ZF. That is a very clear vision statement. You can break that down so many different ways.
Yes.
There are questions whether or not our strategy is there, I will say frankly. But we know that if we can execute because we've been so good for so long and at the level that we have, the things we're doing in electrification, in automation, autonomous driving, et cetera, these things are anticipatory. We're seeing some of that. We're seeing that in the market. We're seeing that in some of the products that are being developed. So in a personal level, I can see that happening. For many other companies, they just sort of sit back there in those proactive, reactive layers, maybe pre-active, but rare that you see that in in action.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's very true.
Getting people to see and to think through these lenses they definitely take some time. You have to experience it a few times. You can't, because theoretically it makes sense. I think people have to experience it. I think that's what really, if you go to the next slide, that's what I feel is that experience in the next, about that walk and talk, right?
Well, and just before we go there, two more things on this.
Mhm.
Uh, this is why being able to measure what we're doing and giving the executive trend lines with which they can make decisions, that allows them to become more preactive. But this assumes that they have a high clarity of vision and that they have a high ability to execute the strategy. But if they can't measure it and they can't see those trend lines, you can't see over the horizon. And then the anticipatory vision, that's that, just that, almost that flash that you get. And that's what happened at Nokia, where I went up to the board and I drew the three lines and 110 and 100, and they literally laughed me out of the boardroom. And the rest of the story is there, and I've shared that in other videos. But um, without being measured and without being able to give them the trends, it hamstrings the leadership. And so this is why it's really important, both for the product and the organization, that we can be getting up into those proactive and even anticipatory. And anticipatory is like future facts. It's like things you know will happen in the future. And so it goes into flash foresight, and then, hey, we know that this is going to be a future fact. We got to react.
Similar to that, if it's slight tangent, but I think it relates because we talk about it
Mhm.
a lot. It's the data that tells the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we call it literally our own little internal palindrome of data first story,
Ooh,
story first data. All
there
right.
you go.
That's mine. I own that. Don't steal that. And we use
Used
this
with
because,
permission.
yeah, right. um, we
That's
use this
excellent.
because if you can't tell a good story through the data or use data to tell a good story,
Yeah,
all it is a lagging indicator, which most
exactly.
KPIs are, right?
There it is.
Most KPIs just look back and go, oh, look, that's what we did.
Yeah. Rear view mirror, trying to drive forward.
Exactly. So
Beautiful.
I'm kind of a broken record with a lot of, well, a lot of my the executives that I coach, like, why are we looking backwards? What's the story we're trying to tell? And if
Yeah.
that story can help frame what that looks like in the future, proactive anticipatory, if it can frame that to say, this is what we think it's going to look like out a year, 2 years, 10 years,
Yeah.
all the better.
Beautiful. Excellent tangent. It fit right in. Cool.
Yeah, because ultimately, if we define it right, defining and versus delivering, like we can say, here's our vision. I can talk all I want. I can say it till I'm blue in the face. I can I can tell my colleagues my vision statement is zero friction.
Yep.
And if they keep saying, oh yeah, 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 and I never ever show that the work that I'm doing is reducing those friction points, that's
Yep.
bringing about higher performing teams, et cetera, right? My talk and my walk are, as it shows here, it's in balance.
Hmm.
People know what I mean, they understand, and that's another layer of that
Hmm.
knowledge, kind of goes along with the 4Ds. It's
Yep.
defining and distilling, but it's knowledge. If I know it, and I understand it because I have agreement in that understanding,
Yep.
right? And there's layers to that. If I have that agreement in that distill agreement, and I really understand, and I'm showing it through my talk and my walk,
Yep.
they start listening first.
Yep.
Then they kind of go, wait a minute, I should
Hmm.
pay attention, or as Teddy would do again, just make a little sniff and go, wait, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
And then they see, oh, maybe I should listen, maybe I'll try that, maybe I'll see if that works with my group or my part of my project or something like that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
from that, I think it's on the next one, right? If you have something, yeah, if that walk is fractured, as you say, if I don't, if I go somewhere else with it, if I express my values in a different way from what I've been saying along the way, which again is part of going to my vision. Having Without that agreement, that distilled agreement between the talk and walk, we know that through the flow friction analysis, we get politics.
Yeah.
And I heard this one, interestingly, I heard a very similar fashion on this one in a webinar recently. Maybe it might have been in a one-on-one kind of thing, a breakout room or whatever. And somebody said, "Oh my God, we get the politics and we get the chaos and we get," and like this person listed every word that is in the flow friction analysis. And I went, "Huh." So you don't have that. You don't have vision. Do you have the right people?
Yeah.
No, we don't.
You know,
Oh, did you define this thing you were talking? No. So you don't have agreement. You can't. And here, and yeah, and which one do we work on first? Well, let's start with vision and let's get that right.
well, and it's like this story Ted and I love to share from one of the projects we worked on over 20 years ago, where one of the business leaders had the big poster with all the value statements of the organization, and next to it was nothing but check marks. And finally, one day, we worked up the courage to ask him, "Hey, what's with all the check marks?" And so he runs over to his door, looks up and down the hall, closes the door, runs back and sits down, and in a hushed voice says, "Yeah, this is every time the executives violate one of these value statements, I just put a check mark." And it was nothing but check marks all the way down the list. So it was definitely fractured. And that's really the origin of this whole idea that we see on these two slides here.
I will tell you another funny one. Then I'm coaching one of our executives. I won't say who in
Don't
this
say
case.
names. Don't say, we'll
No,
get in
I
trouble.
will just say an executive. So I'm
Yeah.
coaching an executive. And we're having conversation, and he's telling me that he can remember the values of the former company he was at.
Wow.
And he knows, oh yeah, and we've got 5 values as well, and we've got these values, and he's going this one, and he's trying to talk it out, try to remember. He couldn't remember them, and I said, well, that for me it's too, because I have to teach so many. I'm teaching people how to build it, so I don't remember all the values. I said, but if I was in my office back at the office, I had it on the wall. They're like, oh yeah, there's the 5 values. We could talk about those 5 values. But just because it's on the wall doesn't mean you're living it.
No.
Doesn't mean you're actually walking it every single day in every decision you make.
Yeah.
How do you show, not just talk it, just say, oh, there it is. There's our 5 values. Like, what are you doing to actually walk it?
Yeah. No, that's exactly correct. And I think this is where I think in organizations people can very quickly pick up on someone who is saying one thing and doing something else.
Very much.
Yeah, very
Very
much
much.
so.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'll let you do the recap.
Sure. So ultimately, as we saw, with the Stacy diagram and the anticipatory vision, there's this bifurcation in the lens of the model, and ultimately that Stacy matrix, that anticipatory vision. Sometimes English is hard for us native English speakers.
Indeed.
It 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 is tough. It is a little bit harder to really look at those different dimensions, the different 2 points plus the communication, and then being able to ultimately read the trend lines and determining those future facts, if you will. Like, how do we measure that to show that this is where we're going to be going?
Yeah.
And then finally, we have to have the walk and talk together. And if we don't, good
Good
luck.
stuff. Yeah. Well, thanks for being with today, Glenn.
Thank
And
you.
we're going to go ahead, and try to keep it on the ending slide and see if I get my uh, menu here so I can stop recording. Wow. Ah, there it is. Got it.